like to introduce everyone to Tom Conlon, who is our artist in residence, associate pastor of worship. And Tom, you are our newest ministerial team member, and so there's probably a little bit less familiarity, but we are excited about the blossoming relationship. So I wanted to share with people a few things that some people may know about you, and others may not, but it's kind of things that are pretty common for you. That, first of all, you're soft-spoken. You can tell me if you agree or disagree.
I agree.
You agree? You challenge the status quo, offering a new lens or way of people to look at things.
That may be true, but I have my own status quo, so I think maybe it's just that I come from a different place and different experiences, and so my normal is a little different than normal here, so maybe that's part of it.
You enjoy motorcycle riding?
I do. And this is really a great place for motorcycle riding.
You're a coffee snob?
I think I'm a coffee snob. Yeah, I think I am.
You enjoy great food, but mainly in community with others. The great food, great being emphasized, and with people being emphasized.
Yeah, I do enjoy to have great food with people.
How about movies? Are you a movie buff?
Whether I'm a movie buff, I don't know. I think if I were pit against somebody like Zach in movie trivia, he would definitely win every time, but I do really enjoy movies.
Okay.
And,
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time. So this is just part of a series of helping people to understand the reach of our staff and what an awesome staff we have as well.
It is pretty awesome.
It is.
And I've watched both Barbara's and Zach's and really enjoyed it. Feel like I got to know them both better by watching it. So yeah, I think this is great.
Yeah. So now it's your turn.
Okay.
So here come the really hard questions. So first of all, we probably see you here in a much smaller window than your whole life is. So I just wanted to ask you how leaning into your gifts and talents in music as a songwriter, as a vocalist, a player of instruments, if you will, how has that shaped your everyday life?
How it shaped my everyday life? Well, I think it's started to shape my everyday life being in a family that's musical. So playing and watching my mom and my grandmother and my sisters play and my aunts and uncles. So I was around music a lot, and I think pretty early I understood, watching some of my family members play, the way that music can be a kind of expression in the moment. Even if you play familiar material, I always tell the story about my grandmother playing these pieces, these jazz pieces, and I would always request the same ones, and she'd start playing, and I would tell her that she was playing the wrong one, because she played it differently every time. She would kind of listen, and she would wait, and she would start playing. And I think that's when I understood that, music isn't a static thing. It's a way to kind of connect with each other, connect to ourselves, connect in the space to the moment. So when I started writing songs, first it was stories and poetry, and then when I started playing, it was songs. That was, probably felt pretty natural, that this is a tool I have to kind of process what's going on, and also to communicate with other people. And it's certainly been for me a really prayerful thing, kind of all along. Something where I can kind of sit alone in a prayerful space and play as part of that listening and crying out thing that happens in prayer. So yeah, I think that's.
And it also seems from stories that I've heard that you were involved in music in church at a very early age as well.
Yeah, I in addition to being from a really musical family, the church that I grew up in had a ton of musicians. And so that was really great for me when I started learning to play guitar, you know, I really fell in love with the guitar, but nobody in my family played. And we couldn't really afford lessons or anything like that, but I could go to church every week and watch what other people were doing and ask them. And but it also made music and sort of learning and growing in music something that was, you know, immediately a really spiritual thing, because a lot of it was happening in the church for me. So yeah, I was a church kid for sure. We were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and, you know, just for many years.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that it sort of became your life?
Yeah, I guess so. I think when I was really young, I perceived some sort of a call, you know, that I would have, as a little kid, before I played music or anything, a sense of calling for me. I just thought, oh, well, that must mean I'm supposed to be a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what I thought you did with a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older and, you know, started to think about what does that mean for me, I eventually realized that pastor was not exactly the whole story or the right fit, that there were certainly things that were probably true about that word for me. But music, you know, I often say this about my grandmother. I think when I watched her play, I think in retrospect, you know, knowing my grandmother really well and having our families, you know, she living with us for a while, us living with her for a while, I feel like I knew her well, but when I watched her play, I feel like that was her truest self, that she seemed most herself when she played. And I think eventually I started to feel that too, that I was kind of more or most myself when I was abandoned to that vulnerability of playing, which is a listening and a speaking thing as well. And, you know, for a shy person to stand in front of a microphone and be vulnerable with an audience, that was terrifying for me for a while, but eventually it became really natural.
Take us back a few years and tell us how you came to be an independent musician, traveling throughout the United States and Europe, and how did that happen?
Well, it was a process that had you know, some leaps in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I mentioned earlier that I, you know, grew up in the church. I was kind of a church kid, and when I started writing songs in my teens, I was writing a lot, and I was playing, you know, in church quite a bit, and in any opportunities at school and stuff, I was just playing. I would cut class a lot to play songs
But that made your mama
in
happy.
the stair. Well, she didn't know that.
Oh.
So in the stairwells and the bathrooms in the school are really acoustically reverberant. So they're great places to play. So that's where you could usually find me. And I had some wonderful music teachers that would write me open-ended passes so that I could just leave class and go play. And so that was charming and lovely. But as I got a little older and started working, I would still, in the area that I was in New York, I would still play, and I was also leading worship a lot at that point. So I would, you know, play at my own church, but then I would also do things at other churches. I formed a couple bands, and we would play the scene, and, you know, around, so into my early 20s. But, you know, as I really got serious about songwriting and wrote and wanted to play in those places where, you know, songwriters played, sometimes national or regional acts would have certain venues that they would play at. I would just play a lot of open mics. It was a place that I kind of gained a new community of songwriters and learned a lot and could try new things. So I did that for years like it was my job. I mean, I would travel 3 or 4 hours to play a couple songs at a really good, you know, a good spot.
That was in addition to your real job.
Yeah, so I worked for IBM for about 7 years as a service rep. So I was on the road a lot with them and traveling to do training and things in other places, but I would always bring my guitar, and wherever I was, I would play the scene there. So I did that for years. But eventually, I did have this sense that that somehow I had this calling that I hadn't quite figured out. And even when I hired on with IBM, I told the interviewer, I said, look, I don't know when, but I'm going to be leaving here to do full-time something, ministry or something like that. And it just took me some time to figure out what that was. And when when it sort of occurred to me that, music can be that thing that is like a spiritual calling. And I think when that started to become clear to me, that process of prayerfully discerning it and was a really beautiful process in the church community that I was in. And initially, for me, it was scary just to play other than in a church. Because the church was really familiar to me. I knew the language there. I knew, I felt like I knew how to communicate and read a room, sort of. But if I went into other places, if I went into clubs or coffee houses, places like that, it was very foreign to me. It was really scary for me. So terrifying, actually, would be the right word. That process of getting out into those places that weren't the church and playing also did sort of feel like a calling, and in that way, for me, it took a lot of faith. But it shaped me in ways too. So I think, I can see that, interestingly, my calling, in a way, called me out of the church. And I think...
it sort of called you out of the church, but not away from the church.
Yeah.
Which is kind of different.
I think we all, in the process of becoming, have our safe home, hopefully, where people who love us help shape us and reflect us, and then at some point, we've got to kind of go on to the next thing, which may be unfamiliar and scary, and that thing will shape us and reflect us too. And so, for me, being pretty shy and timid, doing a public thing was scary at first, but eventually, I guess, it became normal.
Yeah. And you said you always managed to find church wherever you were.
Well, I think church is is a practice and not a place.
I also liked, when I've spoken with you before, you talked about how this certainly was not a venture in becoming rich or wealthy, and that you really had to depend on God. Like the story you told me about having a bag of change and, what you needed. But you just told God, okay, this is what I got, but this is your problem, not mine. So how are you going to fix it? How are you going to feed me? How are you going to give me gas?
I think I realized pretty early that I had a problem with money. When I was young, anyway, that if I had it, I would spend too much, or I wouldn't manage. And and then of course I worked a job where I had plenty of money, and it was not a big deal. But then going on the road, at some point in there, I felt like for me it was important not to pursue a traditional career in music that was kind of in the normal paths that the industry provided through, signing on a label and getting management and touring related to recording and radio play and all that stuff. The whole get signed, get famous thing started to feel really, false to me as a goal. And so I thought, what feels more like, what feels truer than that? And I thought, well, yeah, what if I didn't sign a record deal? What if I didn't go that route? What if I just did it with relationships, and let it sort of expand in a grassroots way? And that's kind of what happened. And it felt like it kept me on course, but it also, there wasn't a lot of money, in that, and that became exciting to me too. So I think I got to experience and explore, what I would call God's economy, where it is His responsibility to provide for what we need, and it's our responsibility to give ourselves away, and so that's what I tried to do, and there were many, many junctures where I thought, how am I going to get what I need? And then I had to stop myself and say, that's not my concern. My concern is how well and fully I give myself. And I would occasionally remind God that it was His job.
Hold up your end of this bargain
that was
here.
His job. But it was all really, that for me was a really good part of the journey of really exercising those faith muscles and experiencing really wonderful, miraculous things. And a lot of that, allowing yourself to be in need, puts you in a different posture in relationships, it can be really humbling, and that's good. Doing pay what you will was terrifying for me because I didn't know how much I would make, right? So I didn't know how to plan things. I didn't know. But for me, that problem was best answered by stepping into this odd faith position where I could say, all right, God, the money thing is not my problem. My work is to schedule myself in ways that make sense and are meaningful, and show up and be really present and give really generously everything that's at my disposal to give. And I trust you for what I need. That just helped me be in a better orientation to people, I could say in the booking process, I don't do this anymore, but I did it for many years. I could say, I don't care what you pay me. You can pay me nothing. Let's just schedule a thing that makes sense. And then it's totally up to you. Which, as well as I could, I wanted to release people from my expectation. And, I would do it with CDs. I would say, hey, if this is meaningful, you want a CD? If you don't have money, let it be my gift to you. And if you do, just sort of check with yourself and see what you'd like to give, and use your heart and give. Either way, one of us is going to get to be really generous, and one of us is going to get to receive a gift, and that's just good for us. So that was good for me to try and figure out ways to do that most of the time, and but it really was beautiful to watch it play out. I could not break the system. I would actively give away as much as I could, and just, stuff would come in from. So that was a really good.
So you were blessed and able to be blessed.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah, and I think we all need, to figure out ways to be really generous, and realize that it's also a great blessing to be in need. It's a great blessing to need other people.
Yeah, it's hard to need other people. It's kind of easy to give.
Right,
but
right. It feels powerful. It's I think either way we get to experience in poverty or wealth, we can get to experience part of the kingdom of God. And if in wealth we get to understand what God's generosity feels like and looks like, and if in poverty we get to experience what God's abundant grace and giving feels like, and receiving it, that's pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
I just think songwriting for me is part of healthy living. So it most of the process really has nothing to do with an audience except me. It is just a way for me to process. I have said this to a lot of folks. My dad just passed in December. And, it was an awful experience. Even being there with him, it was hard. It was hard to find the beauty in that circumstance. It was beautiful, and it was difficult. But, in the moment, I was just hanging on. moving through it with my dad and with the people who were around me, and even driving away from that, I was just reeling for days. And, and eventually I did speak with some people, and it was just this kind of long, protracted process, as it is for most people, of thinking about and things dawning on me, and but I didn't write any songs in that time. But eventually, a month or two later, I started to write. It just kind of started to happen. And for me, at this point, when I start to write about things, that's some indication to me that I'm at a certain point in moving through them. And then it's also a way that I can say to people that I know, hey, know me, here's something that I find hard to say in conversation, or here's something that has just dawned on me in this musical form. It's a way to say, know me. And then, of course, I realized that being in front of audiences is a kind of faith-based way to say, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. Here is my hard experience, or here is what I've understood. And I trust that if I've done my work and done it well, that people will find points to connect to that.
Here you are now, kind of being called back into the church. And so some people might look at it and say, people here at Chestnut Grove might say that this is a different thing for you and a new thing for you. But how have you come to understand this part of your journey?
Well, having the job maybe is different, but the truth is, all along the way, I've been very, very connected to many churches around the country. This country especially, there are lots of places that I would call home bases that are church communities where it very much feels like family. So, while the bulk of my concerts for some period of time might not have been in churches, I was still very connected to church communities all along the way. And so in that sense, it's not really any different at all. Having a job at a church is different. And maybe not real, but a full-time, I'm not going job. Anywhere next month kind of thing, job. Yeah,
But you've had long stints in churches before.
None of it right now is too far afield of stuff that I've kind of done in starts and fits over the years. I think it's more the idea that I'm starting to house shop. Mm-hmm. That's weird, mm-hmm. Being in a church community and growing in relationship and getting connected to people and trying to do things together in meaningful ways, that's all really familiar to me. Saying that I'm gonna buy a property here, that's very weird, mm-hmm. But good, and I think mm-hmm. timely and beautiful and scary mm-hmm. and all that. So I think if there is a new frontier, for me, it is saying I'm going to be here in a different way than I've been in other places.
But you're not necessarily looking to stop what you were doing either. I mean, touring was sort of your life, but you're looking for that to still be part of your life.
Yeah, well, I think at this point in my life, I'm not a spring chicken. Mm-hmm. It makes sense to me that this is part of a continuum. And I do still plan to tour some and do concerts. And, I'll have to be careful about picking those times and, making that work in a way. But yeah, I don't feel myself as having stopped one thing and started another thing. Mm-hmm. It feels like just another sort of combination of all these things that I've been called to.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot of things that I didn't know. Do you have any other remarks or anything that you wanted to say that you didn't have a chance to say?
I'll probably think of a whole bunch of things when we leave. But maybe we have years to get to know each other and to say the things that are important to us and hear the things that other people have to say.
Live and grow together.
Yeah.